The dungeons of King's Landing were colder than Winterfell ever was. Damp stone and the smell of rot filled Ned Stark's lungs. He had resigned himself to death. Honor demanded it, and he had already made peace with the gods. But when Varys came to him, whispering of daughters in danger and the realm on the brink, Ned felt something he hadn't in days: fire. It was Littlefinger who betrayed him, that snake with his lies and half-smiles. But it was Varys, quiet, spider-like Varys, who now laid a different offer at his feet. Not freedom, a chance, a whisper of survival. "She'll kill you, Lord Stark," Varys murmured as the bells rang above. "Cersei does not forgive. Joffrey is not a boy anymore. He is a lion, and lions tear at the weak." Ned clenched his jaw. "Then let her. My honor won't feed your daughters, Lord Stark, nor will it shield them from the Queen's wrath." There was silence, except for the distant hum of an angry city. Then reluctantly Ned nodded. Varys had bribed a few gold cloaks, still loyal to Jon Arryn's memory, and before the sun rose on the day of his execution, Ned Stark was gone. A dead man to the world, smuggled out of the Red Keep through underground tunnels used once by Maegor the Cruel to murder his enemies in their sleep. Cersei woke to the news too late. The traitors escaped? She shrieked, smashing a goblet of arbor red against the stone floor. Joffrey, smug in his new crown, only grinned. "We'll find him," he said, twisting his fingers around the hilt of his blade. "Let him run. I'll hang his daughters instead." That same morning, Sansa was taken into custody, her screams echoing through the halls of the castle. Arya, however, had vanished. Ned rode hard with Yoren of the Night's Watch, who had pledged to take him as far north as the Trident before splitting ways. Yoren had smuggled Arya out the night before and left her in the care of a friend at a nearby inn. Ned and Arya were to reunite in secret, but nothing in Westeros was ever that simple. The news of Ned's escape spread like wildfire. To the south, the Lannisters called it an act of rebellion. To the north, it was a spark. At Winterfell, Robb Stark read the Raven's message with shaking hands. "Father lives." Those two words were enough to start war drums echoing across the halls. Men who had mourned now sharpened swords. The north would not kneel. Catelyn wept, but they were tears of dread as much as joy. Her husband was alive, but at what cost? Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, Tywin Lannister gathered his forces, a storm building beneath his golden banners. "The wolf thinks himself clever," he growled, "but will clip his tail and burn his den." Back near the Trident, Ned Stark reunited with Arya under cover of night. She was thinner than he remembered, fiercer too, a wolf cub hardened by fear. "Are we going home, father?" she asked. Ned looked past her, at the black sky over the river, where war was surely brewing. "No," he said softly. "We ride for River Run. We gather strength." But River Run was not what it used to be. The Tully Bannermen were nervous. The Riverlands caught in the pull of two giants, north and west, and as rumors whispered of Robb marching south, the lines were being drawn. Some viewed Ned's escape as a spark of hope. Others saw it as a defiance punishable by fire, and in the shadows, Littlefinger smiled, a realm in chaos, just how he liked it. The wind at River Run carried with it the scent of steel and smoke. Ned Stark stood by the battlements, staring across. The Tumblestone River as riders approached, his banners, his son. Robb had arrived, but not as a boy coming to his father. He came as the king in the north. The reunion was not filled with joy. There was no warmth, no laughter, just relief, hard and quiet like winter breath. Ned hugged his son tightly, feeling the armor between them more than the blood. "You're alive," Robb said, his voice thick. "They said you were dead." "I should be," Ned answered, "but the gods had other plans." Behind them, Catelyn approached. Her eyes burned, not just with sorrow but confusion and fear. She embraced Ned, but he felt the chill in her grip. "They'll come for us now," she whispered. "They already are." Word of Ned's escape had spread across Westeros like wildfire. The realm was splitting in two. To the Lannisters, his escape was a betrayal. To the north, it was vindication. And to the small folk, it was just more proof that lords played games while they suffered. At King's Landing, Cersei tightened her grip. She kept Sansa close, too close. The girl was now her pawn, paraded in court, forced to swear Ned had planned to take Joffrey's throne by force. The more lies she told, the more Cersei rewarded her with empty promises of mercy. "She'll marry Joffrey soon," the Queen declared, "and the North will kneel before the Iron Throne once more." But the North was already marching. Ned's escape had ignited a war that couldn't be undone. At River Run, Ned sat with Robb and the Bannermen, Great John Umber, Rose Bolton, Rickard Karstark, men who had bled and lost sons at the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps, men who had crowned Robb in Ned's supposed death, but who now looked at Ned with complicated eyes. "You left us to crown a boy," Ned said, not unkindly. As he addressed the gathered lords, "You left us to rot," Karstark said bitterly. "We buried you in our hearts. Then we bled for your ghost." Robb stood. "He's not a ghost. He's our father, and he didn't ask for this war." "Didn't he?" Rose Bolton's voice was low, measured. "You played the game, Lord Stark. Maybe not like the Lannisters do, but you still played. You went south. You served the Mad Boy King. You believed in honor in a city that feeds on lies." Ned felt the shame rise in his throat. "I believed I could do what was right," he said, "and it nearly killed me. I won't make that mistake again." That night, Ned walked alone beneath the stars. Arya sat on a ledge, legs dangling over the cold stone. She held Needle tight, as if the world could only make sense through its point. "Will we ever go home?" she asked. Ned didn't know how to answer. Winterfell was a memory now, a place lost in time. With war at their doorstep, the very idea of peace felt like a lie. "There will be no home if we don't survive this," he finally said. Arya nodded. "Then we fight." But the Lannisters weren't waiting. A raven arrived 2 days later. Tywin had marched, not to River Run, but toward Harrenhal, carving a path of fire through the riverlands. The mountain rode with him, leaving villages smouldering in his wake. This was no battle. It was punishment. And in King's Landing, Stannis Baratheon had sent letters across the realm, revealing the truth. Cersei's children were born of incest. The realm cracked again. Ned held the letter in his hands. His face was pale, drawn. "They'll think this is my doing," he muttered. "They'll say I've turned the realm against the boy king." Robb stood behind him, jaw clenched. "Then maybe we should. It was treason. It was war. But it was also truth." The next morning, the banners were raised again, this time with fire in their eyes. The wolf had survived. And now it was done waiting. The war wasn't waiting. By the time Ned and Robb marched from River Run, the riverlands were already bleeding. Smoke stained the sky like bruises. The mountain had left entire villages in ruin. Women defiled, children slaughtered, old men strung, up as warnings. Tywin Lannister didn't fight battles, he made examples. River Run couldn't hold forever, not against the storm coming from the west. Ned had no choice. He led his forces north, flanking the twins again, this time with Lord Fries. Favour already tenuous. The old weasel greeted them with his sour grin. "I welcomed the boy as king once. Now the dead man walks among us," Walder Frey sneered. "Will I be asked to bend the knee again, or shall I throw my lot with whoever wins next?" "You'll do what's smart," Ned said, colder than ice. "Because if you betray us, I won't be executed in a cage. I'll be alive to tear down these walls stone by stone." For once, Frey didn't smirk. As they pushed north, Ned began hearing whispers. Not from the lords, but the men. Some were uneasy with him alive. A dead man was a martyr. A live one was complicated. Robb had been a king. Now he was a son again. The North didn't know whom to follow, and worst of all, Ned felt it too. He had returned to a world where honor was no longer currency. It was a weight around his neck. His sons looked to him for leadership. His men looked for revenge. But Ned didn't want thrones or crowns or even justice. He wanted survival. He wanted his daughters back. He wanted peace. But Westeros had moved past that. Meanwhile, Arya trained, in secret with the swordmasters Robb had hired from Braavos. Every morning before dawn, she sparred in the shadow of the camps. Her style was unrefined but brutal. She moved like a Stark. She struck like a storm. Ned watched her one morning and barely recognized her. "She's growing into something I don't understand," he admitted to Catelyn as they stood on the hill. "She's growing into what the world demands of her," Catelyn said, her voice heavy, "just like you did." That same day, another raven came, this one from the wall. Jon Snow had sent word. "The Night's Watch needs aid," the message read. "Unnatural things stir beyond the wall. The dead walk. We are too few, too weak. Winter is coming faster than you know." Ned stared at the black wax seal, his blood going cold. He knew Jon wouldn't lie. But how could he convince a realm choking on its own war to look north? That night, Ned called a council, not just of lords, but of truth-tellers. Blackfish Tully, Great John Umber, Rose Bolton, always silent but always listening. And Robb.Ned didn't ask for opinions. He told them the truth. The real war isn't with Lannisters or Baratheons. It's not with kings or queens. It's beyond the wall. My son has seen it. I believe him. The silence that followed was louder than any battle cry. Rose Bolton spoke first. "You ask us to march into snow and shadow while the south burns?" "I ask you to survive," Ned said, but the others weren't so sure. "If we turn now, Tywin will crush the Riverlands," Blackfish warned, "and Cersei will keep Sansa locked in a cage till her death." Ned felt the weight again. One daughter lost to fire, one to frost. No path led to both. The Seven had cursed him with impossible choices. Later that night, Robb entered Ned's tent. His voice was low, but his words sharp. "You say the real war is in the north. Then let me ride south." Ned's head lifted. "What? Let me?" "March to King's Landing," Robb said, "with the north at my back, with the river lords beside me. You go to the wall. Take Arya. Take what you must. But we split. We win both wars." "No," Ned said immediately. "We don't divide. That's what they want." But Robb shook his head. "You raised me to be a Stark, not just your son. And Starks protect the realm, even if it means dying. I'm for it." Ned stared at the boy who had become a man too soon. He saw himself 20 years younger, full of fire and doomed resolve. This time he had no answer, and so, with grief in his gut and steel in his voice, he said, "Then ride, my son. Ride and don't look back." Robb Stark left before dawn, his direwolf grey wind padding beside his horse like a silent shadow. The banners of the North and Riverlands streamed behind him. Wolves, trout, bears, and suns. Over 18,000 men followed. Boys in steel who hadn't yet seen what war did to the soul. Ned watched them disappear into the horizon, heart heavier than armor. It felt like Winterfell all over again, watching his son ride into a world too cruel for honor. But this time, he wasn't marching to avenge a father. He was doing what his father could not, striking first. Catelyn didn't say goodbye. She stood inside the tent, hands clasped, face unreadable. When the silence became too much, she finally said, "You've sent our son into fire." Ned nodded. "Because if I don't go to the wall, there may be no realm left for him to save." Arya heard none of it. She was sharpening needle outside, the stones scraping rhythmically in her lap. She didn't cry when Robb left. She didn't ask if he'd return. She only looked at her father once, expression hard. "If you die on the wall," she said, "I'll never forgive you." "I don't plan to die," Ned said. "No one ever does." They left River Run within 2 days. a small band of riders. Headed north, Ned took Arya, Catelyn, a handful of loyal guards, and a raven messenger from the watch who'd come with the letter. They rode without banners, quiet, ghost-like. Meanwhile, Robb's host moved with thunder. He didn't march straight. To King's Landing. He struck first at Harrenhal, now a Lannister stronghold. The mountain was said to be there, so was fear. The battle was brutal. Grey wind tore through men like cloth. Robb fought like a storm, cutting down knights twice his age. His bannermen made the walls bleed. They found Harrenhal drenched in terror. No hostages, no survivors, only burned corpses left behind by Tywin's retreat. Robb raised the northern banner over its scorched towers. "Let the Queen see it from her pretty balcony," he growled. "The north does not kneel." In King's Landing, Cersei watched the flames on the eastern horizon. She paced like a lioness in a gilded cage, flanked by guards who feared her more than death. "How long until he reaches us?" she demanded. Joffrey, lounging with his crossbow on the Iron Throne, only smirked. "Let him come. I'll give him his sister's head in a box." Even the Kingsguard flinched. Tyrion, now hand-rubbed his temples. "You'll do nothing of the sort," he said. "Every step you take makes the realm hate you more. You're turning allies into enemies faster than Robb ever could." But Joffrey wasn't listening. He never did. Instead, he turned his rage on Sansa. She endured the beatings, the humiliation, the mock trials in court. But she never cried again. Something inside her had frozen. She was no longer the girl who dreamed of princes. She was learning what power looked like when it wore a crown and no conscience. Back in the north, Ned reached Castle Black just as the first snows fell. The gates groaned open, revealing the Black brothers, tired, thin, fewer than ever, and among them, Jon Snow. The boy had become a man. He embraced Ned with silent strength, but his eyes burned with urgency. "We've lost men, whole patrols. The things we thought were dead, they're not. They move at night. They kill in silence. And when they fall, they rise." Ned listened stone-faced. Jon led them beyond the wall days later. Arya insisted on going too, no matter how loud her father protested. She wore black now. She carried needle like it was part of her hand. The forest past the wall was a graveyard. They found the bodies, not burned, not buried, just gone, dragged into the trees. Jon showed them the remnants of an old wildling camp, tents shredded, blood frozen in the snow. And then they saw it. A man, no, not a man anymore. Pale blue eyes, skin like frost, armor that shimmered like ice in moonlight. It saw them. Arya was the first to draw. Jon was the first to charge. Ned had never felt fear like it, not even in Robert's rebellion. This wasn't a war of kings. This was a war against death itself. They barely escaped alive. Back at the wall, Ned sat alone in Maester Aemon's chambers, hands trembling as he poured black ink onto parchment. He wrote with urgency. "To all great houses of Westeros, the dead walk. The north is no longer the border of your lands. It is the last wall between life and oblivion. If we do not unite, we will all fall." He sealed it with Stark wax. And then he lit a fire, because fire, Jon had said, was the only thing they feared. The ravens flew from Castle Black like whispers on the wind, one to each great house, one even to King's Landing. Ned Stark could only hope that old alliances, broken oaths and bitter grudges would mean less than survival when the truth arrived. But he knew better. At Winterfell, the snows had begun to fall heavy. The castle, under the watch of a small garrison loyal to the Starks, remained quiet. Letters arrived with panic. Ned Stark was alive, marching beyond the wall. Robb Stark held Harrenhal and was pushing toward King's Landing. The north stirred. Again. But it was no longer in celebration. It was in fear, and in the dark corners of the dread fort, Roose Bolton read his raven and said nothing. He watched the snow pile high and told no one what he planned. Back beyond the wall, The cold grew, more violent. Ned had never faced anything like it. Even in the deepest winters of Winterfell, the cold was a presence. But here, it was alive, biting, watching, waiting. They had gone beyond Craster's keep and found nothing living for miles. Arya walked beside Jon Snow now, matching his steps, asking fewer questions, watching everything. She was only a girl, but in this wilderness, she walked like someone already dead. Ned saw her one morning standing alone by a cairn of blackened bones. She said nothing when he approached, didn't flinch when he laid a hand on her shoulder. "They don't leave bodies," she said. "They take them." He nodded. "Yes, they took Mother." Ned's heart stilled. "No, she's at Castle Black, safe. Not her body, her mind. You sent Robb one way, yourself another. You left her behind again. She doesn't look at anyone the same anymore." He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He couldn't explain the burden, the impossible choices. Arya didn't want words. She wanted vengeance. A week later, they returned to Castle Black. Jon rode with urgency to rally more rangers. Ned met with Maester Aemon again and reread the letters they had received in response. From Stannis Baratheon. "I believe your words. I have seen fire. I will come north with men. Hold. From House Arryn. Lord Robin is sickly. We can send no men, but offer grain and aid. From Cersei Lannister. Nothing. Not even a threat. And then, from Robb. A raven with torn wings arrived at midnight. We have taken the King's Road, the gold cloaks scattered, Lannisters retreating to the city. But something is wrong. They are not resisting, they are waiting. I fear a trap. I march in 3 days. Robb. Ned felt the pit in his stomach deepen. At King's Landing, the Queen was silent but calculating. The small council met without her more often now, with Tyrion barely holding the city together. Supplies were short. Fear was growing. Joffrey was erratic, demanding executions, torturing prisoners, screaming that the North would burn. Sansa sat quietly at his side, her expression carved from stone. She had tried once to escape, but they caught her. Now she waited, watched, endured. She knew Robb was coming. She knew her father still lived. And that knowledge, quiet and warm beneath the pain, kept her from breaking. But Cersei had a plan. She had sent ravens too, but not to lords, to sellsword, companies, to pirates, to old Valyrian loyalists and anyone desperate enough to bleed for gold. She knew the city couldn't hold forever, but it only needed to hold long enough. Back at the wall, Jon returned with 10 rangers, 2 wounded, 1 already half dead. "They're moving south," Jon said grimly. "The dead, slowly, quietly. But there are more. Each night they grow. We saw them in the distance, dozens, maybe hundreds. They don't march like an army. They seep like fog." Ned turned to Arya and Catelyn, who had spent her days helping. At the infirmary, silent as a ghost, he gathered the brothers of the Night's Watch, stood before them in the shadow of the wall, and declared what hadn't been spoken in generations. "We are the last light before darkness. This isn't a battle for kingdoms. This is a battle for the living. When the fire dies, there will be nothing left to rule." Jon nodded, hand on Longclaw. Arya whispered, "Then let's make sure it doesn't die." That night another raven came, this one not with words, but with a warning. A riderless horse, eyes wide, legs trembling. Its saddle carried a black cloak, soaked in frozen blood. The dead weren't waiting anymore. They were coming. The riderless horse was the final warning. No sigil, no words, just blood and silence. The wall had never felt so small, so fragile. Ned Stark stood upon its edge, as if staring into the end of time. Jon stood beside him, eyes hard, watching the horizon. The wind no longer howled. It whispered in, Tongues, voices of the dead carried through trees that stood like gravestones. They had days, maybe less. Every man at Castle Black prepared for war. But it wasn't war. It was a last stand. Ravens were sent again, though Ned no longer believed anyone would come. Stannis had promised men, but there were no banners on the wind. Winter had come faster than politics could move. Inside the keep, Arya trained with a single-minded fury. She no longer cared what her father said. She no longer feared anything. She had crossed a line only the broken know, the line where pain becomes purpose. "I can kill them," she told Jon, gripping needle. "They bleed." Jon didn't tell her the truth. They didn't bleed like men. But he saw something in her eyes that made him believe she'd try anyway and maybe succeed. Catelyn, meanwhile, was slipping. She spoke less, ate less, slept even less. She looked at Ned as if he were a ghost. "All of them are gone or dying," she whispered. "You should have stayed dead, Ned. The world wasn't ready for a man like you." He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, Robb Stark reached the gates of King's Landing with 30,000 men. Tywin had never returned to the city. He had pulled his forces west. Joffrey still sat the throne, but the walls were weak and the people starving. Robb didn't storm the gates. He surrounded them, 1 day, 2 days. On the third, the gates opened, not with banners, with wildfire. Cersei had unleashed it beneath the outer slums, a trick Aerys had once planned. She lit the city herself, screaming as flames swallowed everything, enemy, ally, innocent alike. Robb's men were torn apart by the explosion. Thousands died in green fire. But Robb survived. He led the remainder of his host through ash and bone. King's Landing was no longer a capital. It was a tomb. He found Joffrey dead, stabbed in the chest, by his own guards. He found Cersei sitting on the Iron Throne, burned but smiling. "I won," she said. Then she took the last of the poison hidden in her ring and died. Sansa had fled before the fire. She had used the chaos to disappear, led by a servant, loyal to Tyrion. No one knew where she went. Robb stood in the throne room, surrounded by fire and smoke. The Iron Throne, melted at its base, stood crooked. He turned his back to it. He didn't want to rule ashes. Back at the wall, the storm broke. They came, silent, endless. The dead poured from the woods, eyes glowing like frost-bitten moons. The first wave crashed against the wall like a wave of bones. Flaming arrows flew, oil spilled, men screamed. Ned fought with everything he had. He led from the front, sword flashing, voice hoarse from command. Jon stood beside him, Longclaw singing death. Arya disappeared into the chaos, reappearing only to drive needle into cold flesh. Again and again they held, 1 night, 2 nights. But the wall was breaking, not just stone, but soul. The men were too few, the fires too small. Hope died faster than the light, and then, on the 3rd night, a horn. From the south, banners rose. Baratheon, Tully, Mormont, even Tyrell. Stannis had come. He rode at the head of 5,000 men, with Melisandre by his side and Rella's flames lighting the snow. They cut through the dead like divine wrath. The tide turned, but not fast enough. In the final charge, Ned Stark faced a White Walker blade to blade. Cold steel against Valyrian steel. They clashed beneath the broken shadow of the wall. He killed. But not before it drove a shard of ice into his chest. Jon screamed. Arya reached him just as he fell. His breath fogged the air once, twice, then stopped. He died with his sword still in hand. They burned his body at dawn. Jon lit the fire. Arya didn't speak. Catelyn sobbed like a widow, burying her love for the 2nd time. Robb arrived dazed, later broken and hollow. They met at the wall, what was left of it, fatherless, kingdomless, united only by grief. Jon stayed behind, now Lord Commander. Arya rode south to vanish into myth. Catelyn returned to the ruins of Riverrun. Robb was offered the crown again. He refused. "There is no more north," he said. "There is only the living, and what we choose to make of what's left." And so the story ended not with thrones or crowns, but fire and frost. Ned Stark escaped King's Landing to save his family. In doing so, he saved the realm. But he did not live to see the peace he died for, because in Westeros, no man escapes war. Not even the honorable ones.